case someone needs to come back and view the video, you'll have a reference. It's pretty simple. Obviously, my information's in the chat over here, and we are right next door. So if you do need anything or you want to come by, even to see what a closing room looks like, what it's like when you walk into title, what your clients will be facing. It's like your first day back on campus if you're going to school, right? Just, it's a very easy, small tour, but then you can say hi to people, get a face with a name. So when you know that you're speaking with an escrow officer, what does that mean? What do they do? You know, the very basics. You don't need to know a lot of the details. It's more just feeling comfortable with being in that environment because you will be there with clients to help them close. So if at any time you want to stop by and just check things out and get a feel for where you'll be at some point in the near future, I'm always happy to help you with that. You know, 15, 20 minutes, say hi, ask some questions. I think it's just a good thing to familiarize yourself with that part of your job. So now that we have it recorded, I'm going to go to a screen share and do some basic slides. And anytime we can pull out of it, if you guys have questions along the way, please feel free to ask. I do like teaching. I may be new in the title world, but I've spent a lot of years coaching team sports, individual sports, English classes to foreigners. So I can slow down or speed up as fast as you can go. So with that in mind, does anyone have any questions before we start? You guys pretty good? Okay, Sarah, welcome. All right, let's do this. All right, and let me know if you can't see this, but I'm gonna screen share. I'll minimize this little guy over here. All right, can everyone see this okay? I can't see you now because I'm basically on my screen, but if you can see all right, let me know. All right, excellent. Okay, so welcome to Title 101. It's a basic how-to. We're gonna go over some of the key points. And anytime you have questions, please just write them down. That way we can address them in further classes. So basically, what is title insurance? I'm sure at some point on your exam, you were asked maybe a question about title or the word title came up, but you're still wondering, what is it? Why is it important? Why do we have to deal with title? We're selling homes. We're gonna go over that. We're gonna start a file, which means when you get a listing, when you go under contract, when do you talk to title? How do you get the ball rolling? That's something we'll go over because that's the start of the whole process, right? Who pays for what? What are your buyers going to be paying for? What are your sellers going to be paying for when it comes to title? You'll hear us talk about things like a PR, preliminary report, or a title report. Okay, so that one down here, which includes, well, what is the difference between an escrow officer and a title officer, right? And wire transfers, things like that. They're pretty simple, but just to give you an overview, the closing table, what happens at closing, and why work with us, right? There are a lot of title companies, there are a lot of lenders, there are a lot of home warranty companies. A lot of people do essentially the same job, and with title, we're so regulated by the government. What makes one title company different from the next? So pretty simple. All right, what is title insurance? How many of you have bought a car in the past, new or used? Right, I can't see you, but I know you're probably raising your hand. Now, when you bought a car and you didn't know the history of the car, you usually order a Carfax, right? Or you want to know if it's been damaged, what the title is, how many owners. Title insurance is like a Carfax or a Housefax for property, right? What we cover, what we insure is the legal side of the property. We're not protecting against damages from a tree blowing over and breaking your window. We're protecting against the land itself. So whether you have easements, you have water rights, maybe there's an access point to the neighbor's yard that they have permission to be on. There are legal issues, maybe there's unpaid taxes. Title goes through and does a background check and make sure that title can be cleared or marketable for you to buy or sell with your clients. So without that Housefax or proof that the title itself is good to go, you can't buy or sell a home. So the insurance that you're paying for, and we'll get into this a little later with the buyers and the seller side, you're paying for protection, basically covering one party to make sure if anything happens to the property or there's a lien and the bank has first rights, well, who gets the property? Who pays for what? Who's responsible? That in essence is title insurance, okay? And we'll get more into it. Does anyone have any questions or issues that you run into where you're like, hey, I had an issue with title, this came up? Does anyone have any questions on that? I'll clear out. Okay. Again, if you do, and even if you're like, man, I don't even know what questions to ask right now, that's also not a problem. As you get more into your job, you're going to run into situations where your hand will naturally come up and say, okay, now I have a question. So if you don't have one right now, don't feel bad. That's pretty natural. Okay. All right. So let's go back to screen share. All right. So here we go. Title insurance, pretty simple. Now, starting your file, you as an agent, whether you're the listing agent, okay, you're working with the seller, or you're a buyer's agent, you're working with the buyer, right? As soon as you get an offer in, and this is on the buy side, okay, as soon as you get an offer that's accepted, right? You go under contract and you start filling out the REPC, right? That is the perfect time, as soon as you get it, not to wait several days. That way we can start going on the house facts, doing the search, because the longer you wait, then it takes us time to do the search and get back. So as soon as you go under contract, send us the REPC, the MLS sheet, if there is one. And that's crucial because that tells us if there's an HOA, right, that we need to go get a payoff for before they move. It tells us where the commissions are going, who's on the deal. Those are very helpful bits of information, so we don't have to try and chase other people down, which can stall out the process of close. So the REPC is key, the MLS sheet, and the buyer's full name and contact information. When you meet them, it's very critical, and this is a communication point. It's very critical that obviously you get their first, last name, phone number, address, right? That's a given, but also their social. If you can get the social ID number, that helps us then on the back end when we have to reach out to them to say, hey, it looks like you have an HOA payment or unpaid something. We would need that information to then request the payoff statement from the bank, the HOA, whoever it may be. So the least amount of work to herd cats, right? You're chasing down clients, we're trying to chase them down. If you can give us that information up front and let your client know that at some point the title company may reach out so they can handle your payoffs and make sure all the funds are going where they need to, that definitely increases the speed of the process and make sure there's no surprises when it comes to closing. Okay, so those three things are vital. As soon as you go under contract with a buyer, send those three things over to title. And to us, that means you're going to send it into an escrow officer. The escrow officer is the one that handles all the funds, all the money. Inside title, and I'm going to stop share for just a second. I know I use a lot of hand gestures and I know you can't see me. So if you're wondering, okay, well, explain to me what is title first. When I'm sending in an order to title, who is that? So let's say Real Advantage is the title company, right? In the state of Utah, the escrow department and the title department are under the same umbrella. Okay. So the person you're going to work with the most is the escrow officer. They're handling the money, where it goes. They're the ones that you will meet with when your client signs the paper at closing. That technically is the escrow officer or the team. All right. The title plant, they're the ones in the background doing all the research, checking into your title to make sure the property is good to go. And if we need to clean it, right, pay off taxes, do any of that, the escrow team is the one handling that. So you will see the escrow team, you won't see the title people searching, but you're still in the title company. Other states, they separate the businesses. You'll have escrow companies and title companies, and they're completely separate. In Utah, it's under the same umbrella. Does that make sense? All right, it's just good to know. Once you learn it, it's not a problem, but people will wonder who you're meeting with. Most likely you are going to talk to the escrow team and the escrow officer in there. Ooh, nice. Mark, who determines what title company to go, the seller or the buyer? It's a great question. Now, a lot of times, the buyer and the seller, they may not know who to go to. They won't have a preferred person they've worked with. If they bought a home in the past and they had a title company that their agent recommended, they might just go back to the same title company because that's all they know. Typically, new buyers and sellers will ask the agent, where should we go? Because they don't know. So part of your job, kind of like being a general contractor, you'll have your subcontractors, right? Just because you have one person who does concrete, what happens if they do a really good job, but they're so busy, they don't have time to get you in? Well, you're going to have to find a backup, right? Or the person you're used to dealing with, they've always been good, but they start dropping the ball, right? It's nice to shop around and do that. But once you find a system that works, typically agents, you'll hear them say my title company or my lender. I can't tell you whether that's a good or a bad thing. I would just advise you to make sure that you find a system that works. And honestly, it comes down to who you like working with. As I said, most title companies, essentially, they all do the same thing. The rates might be a little different. But for you, it's, Mark, who do you feel comfortable talking to? When you call in, do you like to be hands off where, hey, I got my stuff to title. Unless there's an issue, I'm at work. So, I don't need someone calling me all the time. Other people, they like to know what's going on. There's a certain style of communication. And that takes time, right? To feel your flow, what works for you. So if the buyer or the seller has a title company they've worked with before, if they feel really adamant, they're like, no, we have to work with them. You can give them a shot. That's not a problem. But if you do have a title company that how things work, it will get done, that's on you to then refer them to the client and say, look, we've been using Real Advantage, Shanice or John, whoever you work with. We have it dialed. We know what's going on. We're in good hands. And, because of X, Y, and Z, we can get a really good rate, or, not a discount, but they're things that you can help to make sure the price is fair. You understand what's going on. There's no surprises. And a lot of times the client will just say, okay, well, we trust you. You're our agent, right? They trust you to look out for their best interest. So it's your job to make sure that whichever lender, home warranty company, title company you use, you believe in, and they trust that. But sometimes they'll just say, hey, I want to work with First American because they helped us on our sale. And they might be adamant about it. And so that's up to you then how you go. Or you can say, hey, I usually use this company and I know they'll take care of us. Does that make sense? Okay. That way, it's kind of like with my outside projects. I ride for different companies, different sponsors. But just because you want to buy a motorcycle, it doesn't mean I'm going to send you to BMW or Kawasaki or whichever company I determine. I like to ask a lot of questions and then put the right fit with the person. But if they really don't know, then yeah, I'll say you want to buy a KTM because I trust the quality. I know what's in the bike. You won't be disappointed. But great question. Thanks for asking. All right, so back into our screen share. Some of these are going to be a lot easier to go over. Others might have questions. Now, looking back at this over here on the right side where it says under contract, things to be aware of. Even though you sign the REPC and you might have a contract, things change, okay? There might be an additional, lien on the property. There might be other considerations. Someone may have passed away, so you're gonna get the death certificate and you need to put an addendum or an addition to the contract. Anytime the contract changes, for whatever reason, an address, a name, an addendum needs to be filled out, and that needs to be sent to title. If we don't know there's a change and we find out about it right before closing, a lot of process has to be redone because there was a change and no one was notified. So the better you communicate every time there's a change or there's instructions that the escrow gives you, such as where to send a wire, all of that is communication that needs to be notified to us so we can keep in our records and make sure that that contract is what it is upon signing. Now, down on closing, you as the agents, and this is very crucial, okay? Unless you have a transaction coordinator that does this for you, it is your responsibility to call the title company and schedule your closing appointment with the escrow officer. Okay. You can call in, we can look on the schedule, see what's coming up. You talk to the buyer or seller and see when they're anticipating to close. But the sooner you can kind of schedule something, that way we know what to look out for, the better, because if we have to get more background check done, if we have to clear the title and get more tax payments or HOA payments, it's nice because it gives us an idea of when things need to be done. And you're not saying, well, we don't know where we're going to close, but we'll get all the information. And then all of a sudden, instead of closing next week, you say, can we close tomorrow? Well, jumping 1 week ahead, if we don't have all the files back, is going to be really difficult. And it might make your clients angry because you're promising them you can close tomorrow, and the notification was not till next week. So make sure you call in and schedule, and you're working with your clients to know what's going to work, and then we can base it from there. Obviously, we can change the date a little bit, but that is crucial information. All right, let's see. If this will let me click. Okay, so from the lender's side, right? Let's see. Did it skip one? Okay, sorry, listing side here. So we went over the buyer's side. If you're a listing agent, here are some of the things you want to send in. Same thing, seller's full name and contact. If you can get the social, that speeds it up so we don't have to go find it later. I spend a lot of time tracking down clients of agents because they forgot to get information, and then I have to try and get a hold of them, but then they won't answer to me because the agent forgot to tell them that title will be reaching out for the information. And so they won't answer emails or phone calls because they think we're scamming or spamming them. So as an agent, it helps both sides to let them know, this is the title company I work with. They might be reaching out for information to get a payoff. But before that even happens, if you can get more of their information and the social, or if they have a loan, getting the loan account number, things like that, that's great. If not, that's what we reach out to get, to say, hey, if there was, let's say you have a client and they bank with Wells Fargo, and I've got to call in to request a payoff for their mortgage at Wells Fargo, I will need the social security number, the loan number, and the bank they're getting the mortgage through. And that's fine. We reach out and do that all the time. But as long as you can notify them and say, hey, Real Advantage Title, here's their email, here's the phone number. If you hear from them, they're reaching out to get that information. That way they can make sure your house is able to sell. Your mortgage has to be paid off upon closing. And that's it. We're not digging into any part of their past. We just need that. It's authorization from us, a third party, to contact the bank so we can get funds moving on that end. Does that make sense? Okay. Simple, but again, until you have more time doing it, you might have clients contacting you saying, why are they reaching out to me? That's why. Again, copies of their ID, very crucial. We have to verify it's them. And guys, this is a very crucial point that causes a lot of confusion sometimes from the clients. If we're asking you for their ID and they're like, why do we need this information? And I'll stop sharing for a second just because my face will express the feeling. Let's say you have a client, all right, and his name is John Smith. And we go to pull the background records or the legal records for a John Smith in Utah. How many John Smiths do you think we're going to find? Right? A ton. Yeah, a lot, right? If it was Joseph Smith, who knows? Now, I'm just kidding, but seriously, right? And even Hispanic names, there's like Maria Garcia, 12 could pull up. So the reason why we try and get social or a full name, the middle initial or the date of birth then tells us exactly who the person is, because if not, we'll pull them up all the time and it will show property for maybe 6 people and 2 of them have criminal records. And so they'll get denied for whatever we're trying to do because there's some sort of history and we don't know who it is. So that's why we request information. So if your client's like, why do they need to know my middle initial and date of birth? Because quite often there's a lot of people with very similar names or it's a common name. And that's it. That's all they really need to know. Sometimes it gets fairly humorous when we call and they argue with us about giving their middle name because they're embarrassed that it's Daryl or Wyatt or something. We're like, look, I don't care what your middle name is. We just We need to get this moving. So again, closing, make sure you call to schedule the appointment for office. And okay, so let's go next one. All right, costs. Who pays for what? This is another part of title that isn't super complicated, but at first glance, it might. Let's say you are the buyer's agent, right? What does the buyer pay for as far as title is concerned? What they pay for is this top area called the lender's policy. And you're thinking, why do they have to pay for more insurance? Now, the lender's policy is protecting the lender. Your buyer is going to borrow money to buy a house. And if they're spending $300,000 on the mortgage, but then a couple months down the road or a year down the road, it goes upside down, they can't pay their mortgage, the lender wants to know that they're protected, right? It's insurance protecting them because of the loan. And that is what the policy helps do. And it's based on the amount of the home, right? And then you add in very basic fees. These closing fees are very simple and it's mostly recording. This CPL is just a protection letter saying that the home is insurable, that title is guaranteeing that we can buy or sell this home. It's a $25 flat fee, very, very simple. And then recording fees, this is through the state, okay? $45 a document. Usually there are two because you have to record it and there's a document fee that they record. So if you add 25 and 90, and then based on the purchase of the home, right? The bigger the purchase, the bigger the policy. You know, you could be anywhere from $1,200 up to a couple grand. It all depends. The big thing is depending on the policy of the home. And then we usually have a flat fee for escrow officers. You know, it depends on the officer, but usually around $300 or $400. That's all they make on it. So that's really easy to get a nice bid and know what they will be paying on the buyer's side for that lender's policy. Now on the seller's side, okay, if you are a listing agent and you're selling a home, your client is going to be purchasing the owner's policy. And I'll stop you there real quick. In Utah, almost 99% of the time, your seller, your client will pay for this homeowner's policy, okay? There are exceptions where if it's under contract and the seller agrees that the buyer will pay for it, that has to be in writing, and then the buyer can pay for that. Let's say they work out a deal and say, okay, I don't want to sell my house to this guy, but he says, look, I'll pay for your homeowner's policy if you'll sell it to me. And I'm the seller, I'm thinking, yeah, sure, if you're going to pay for my policy and I don't have to, I'll sell it to you. But that has to be in writing so it's understood by law that in the transfer of ownership, who paid for what. Okay, but just remember that 99% of the time, the seller will pay for this policy right here, the owner's policy. And again, that is also based on the sales price of the home. And then you add in just this fee right here, which is the closing fee. So two things, and that gives you how much your seller will pay for. So if they're wanting to know price shopping, that's the gist of it. Does anyone have any questions as far as cost? If your client wants to know, well, how much am I paying? Why do I have to pay for insurance? No questions? Shelly, Sarah, any questions on what you would be paying for?
No questions.
Okay. And I only make sure because money is always like that touchy subject where your client may not want to buy or sell a house over like a $300 transaction. That will come back and say, why am I paying for this? It's $300. And you're like, well, you're getting a mortgage for $600,000 and you're arguing over a couple $100. That does happen. So you can just let them know from a buyer's standpoint, the lender wants to be protected in case that buyer cannot pay their mortgage. So that's insurance protecting them. On the seller side, what that does is your seller, your client, when they sign the documents and there's a transfer of ownership, if there is something that the title department missed, or let's say there's an unpaid tax or there's a lien and someone else has priority or they have interest in the property and title missed that, and something happens and the buyer gets a notification from some company that had a lien against them for water rights in their yard, and that wasn't found, the buyer is thinking, wait a minute, this company's going to buy my house, like take my house, I'm getting sued. So the policy that they paid for, the seller, it protects them from the new buyer coming against the seller and saying, hey, you didn't disclose this, I'm going to sue you. Well, that protection, the owner's policy protects that seller to say that they're free and clear. And if something happens, the buyer has to file a claim with the title company because we're insuring them. And that way the seller is protected when they sell their house to say, look, we said everything was good. And as far as we know it is, if something happened, the title company is now protecting me, which is why they paid for the policy. Does that make sense on the seller side? Okay, that gets missed a lot. So I just want to be clear on it because it is super important. And when you're educating your clients, they're going to want to understand why they're paying for what they are.
Hey, Spencer,
Yeah.
does that title insurance ever drop off?
You mean as far as like, how long does it last? That's a great question. As far as I've understood so far, usually that, that protects them for, I think it's a 24-month insurance policy. Because usually once they're past that, if something would have been brought up against title, that claim would have came up in a short period of time. So for now, I'm just going to say that it's typically a 24-month policy or a 2-year policy, but let me check into that. Mark, would you type your email in the text box? I'm going to write it down. And then when I find out the actual answer, if there's a stipulation, I'll send you an email and I'll let you know.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, because that's a great question. I asked the same thing. I'm like, well, it's like AppleCare. I bought a new computer and AppleCare only lasts so long, right? It's a great question. All right. All right, you got it in there. Perfect. I'll send it to myself and I'll write it down as we go. But thank you. That's a good one. Anyone else on insurance? Or there's a lot. Insurance is kind of one of those like, yeah, it's not boring, but it's important. It's like a spare wheel. It's only important when you need it. If not, we forget about it. All right, here we go. We'll start cruising through some of these. This is back to the discussion on the difference between an escrow officer or what escrow does and what the title department does. Now, remember, these functions are under the same title company here in Utah. Escrow does all the funding. Okay, we also clear the title. When we get the report back from the title department, who does all the searching, right? They do all the due diligence, looking at the history of the property itself. We get that initial report back from them. And then as we look through it, we're also going to look through to say, oh man, these people have 3 mortgages or excuse me, they had to refinance. And let's say they got support from the government, like some sort of subsidy. They might have a second mortgage tied onto their first one. And that has to be cleared through the government before their first mortgage is paid off. So we go through and make sure that the title is clear. So if you get a PR back, which is what you'll get from us after you send in your order, and you'll get a plat map, the escrow officer or team will send you an email and notify you, hey, we just got the report back. It shows that they have 2 mortgages. There's a couple, unpaid taxes. Don't alarm your clients. Don't alarm them by going back and saying, hey, title just said that we can't sell your house. That's not what we're telling you. When you get the PR back, what that says to you is, okay, here's the land as we see it. Here are other things. Maybe there's an injunction. Maybe there's a divorce. A divorce has to be cleared because if there's a separation of ownership, we need to have the document, the divorce decree, stating who legally owns the house. Do they split it 50-50? Does it fall to the wife, the husband? That's crucial because in the transfer of ownership, that's a big asset to be unsure about. So those are things that we need to get information from the client. That way at closing, when they sign, we know who the house is going to, who gets the money. So you don't have to alarm your client. Communication should be very simple from you to them. hey, we got the report back. It looks pretty good. There's a few items on there that the title needs to go clear, you know, a few taxes, things like that. That's when we usually will reach out or let them know that reach out to say, we need some additional information so we can go clear these items. Does that make sense? That way your client doesn't freak out and say, oh no, I can't sell my house. It just lets them know that we need to go to work to make sure everything is okay, and it goes. And you're going to run into more issues, which you'll have questions later on, but don't freak out. We'll help explain what they are. And then that's our job to clear them.
Spencer, your
Yeah.
voice, your voice broke up there.
Okay, sorry, where did I leave off?
Can you repeat the last couple sentences? Not to worry about your clients.
Okay. Yep. Basically, communication is very simple. Once you get the PR back, the escrow team will notify you what items that might need to be dealt with. That is a very good time for you to then just notify your clients again that title would reach out. So we can get a social security number. We might need a death certificate. And that way they're expecting it. So when we call or send an email, we're not waiting 2 weeks for them to finally get around, because they're like, well, who is this? Why are they calling? That takes time. And if the sooner we can get that information, the quicker that we can make the title clear and get funding going. If not, it stalls the process dramatically. So just know it's about communication, but that's it. So again, title, typically, and this is key too, you're going to hear people talk about turnaround times. At the bottom of this screen, the PR is a preliminary report or a title report. Okay, you'll hear them called by different names. That usually is emailed to the escrow officer. Our times are a lot better now. It's not 3 to 5 days. Usually it could be 2 days, 3 days at most. We'll get it back from the title plant. And then once we see it, if there are any issues, that's where the escrow team will start working to clear the title, and we will notify you, the agent, about any major issues that need to be dealt with in case you need to talk to the client or we have to reach out. Any questions on turnaround times?
I have one for cash offers.
Yeah.
So usually with a mortgage, it takes a lot longer, but if it's a cash offer, what's your turnaround time from offer to being able to close?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So cash offers are nice. Oh, yes, this is helpful. If it's a cash offer, you have to use the seller's title for both sides. Okay, so if you have a buyer and they're coming in with cash, even if they have a title company, it doesn't matter. Cash is always dealt with by the seller's title company.
Okay, yeah, very good to know. All
So
right.
that's kind of a key side note, but back to your question, as far as turnaround, even if it's a cash deal, the turnaround with the PR will be the same because we still have to do all the same research. That doesn't change the timing there. Where cash speeds up the process is because we don't have to deal with a lender, and you're not having to go back and forth between them and clear everything else. I can't give you a definite how many days it speeds up the process, but because there's less people to send information to, I don't have to get a payoff maybe from a mortgage company, this, that, and the other. It drastically improves the turnaround time of closing because the funds are already ready to go.
Okay.
But if there is something with title and there's an issue with the property, let's say there's, are you familiar with what an easement is?
Yes.
Okay. That's probably showed up on the test and you'll hear people talk about them. Let's say, for example, you have a house and there's another house right behind it. And the first property owner is giving a right of way or right of passage through their yard to get to the other house. And the person in the back is selling, and the person in the front no longer wants to grant access to the house behind it. That can be a problem because how would you get to the house? So that easement needs to be addressed. And if the property owner in the front does not give access, there has to be a workaround. Now, usually that's not always the case, but we know that people can be grumpy and stingy with who does what. That even if it's a cash buyer and they come in and say, we have the funds, What are you going to do about a neighbor who will not give access or the easement is not taken care of? That can stall it. But cash itself does speed up the process a lot just because you can get them into the house sooner. We don't have to deal with a lender. There's less things to clear. But if there's something wrong with the title and the property, that's usually where we run into issues. And if it's not that, it's trying to get the information from people. I've called the same HOA company that every day for the last 5 days, sent emails, talked to the agent to try and get a hold of the HOA. We can't get them to respond. So without a payoff, I can't get the documents to the other side, and we're closing in 2 days. So that's where it's always helpful as the agent to make sure that communication is there. If we have our information, we can get it done really fast. If not, we're chasing people trying to get it done.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Cash typically is king, and it does help in many situations speed everything. Now, this is a question. Let me make sure I didn't skip a slide. Okay. And we're almost to the end of this, and then we can kind of do some Q&A. These 4 terms come up quite a bit, and you will see and hear them. We thought it was a good idea to put a slide here just so you understand the difference between these words, because a lot of them happen simultaneously or close to the same time. If you talk about a settlement to your client, anyone else, that is the actual signing. Okay, when you're getting ready for settlement, they're in the room, people are signing the transfer of ownership. Closing, even though you schedule a closing with us, and that's when you're in the room, technically closing happens after they have signed the documents. Okay, the settlement is when the transfer happens, they go through everything, they sign it, and then after they sign, that's why it happens like almost right after each other. The closing is the process that happens after the documents are signed, right? And following really closely with that, the funding starts. If you do the settlement and the closing in the morning, we typically can be funded in the same day. But if you don't schedule a closing until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, right? 3:30 is the last, like that's the, it's like being at a bar, like last call. 3:30 is the cutoff date for funding for a lot of banks. If we do not get it funded by 3:30, it will not be recorded till the next day. So it's always crucial to call your escrow officer and understand when to schedule a time. And if your clients can get in the morning, we can usually fund and record the same day. But if it happens later in the afternoon or the evening that we do the closing and settlement, we can't even fund because the banks aren't open, and recording will not happen till the next day or the day after. So if you're on a time crunch, make sure that you schedule early. So that way, when the settlement happens, they sign, we get to work on the closing, and we can try and do the funding in the same day. And that's getting everything dispersed. That's when we have all the funds are ready and we can pay off the mortgage, we can pay off the HOA, we can pay off their taxes. And then whatever's left will then go to the new or the seller, it goes to their bank account or wherever they have the money wired to. That's how much they make on their house after all the other fees and funding has been taken care of. Once it's been funded, that transfer of ownership, which were the documents that were signed, that's sent to the county recorder's office to actually be recorded with the state that the change of ownership has taken place. Technically, once that has happened, it is done. But just because they sign the papers, that's just the settlement. Then the closing, funding, recording happens very soon after. So just because your client signed the documents doesn't mean that they own the house because it hasn't been recorded with the county. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right, great, guys. And again, if you have questions, and you will as we go forward, feel free to ask, but that just gives you an understanding of when you hear these terms, it's not as if signing the papers, it means it's a done deal. We still have to fund and record. And that's where it comes with the county. So sometimes if you get in a position where everything's been funded and you're like, well, you know, what's going on? Are we done? We can't control the county. They're usually pretty good about it, but sometimes if they take a little longer to record and you're wondering why it hasn't been officiated, that's the county. So just know those 4 items are slightly different, but they happen very close to each other. Now, one of our last slides just kind of helps you understand what's going on. Unfortunately, the state just removed this top discount with military. We were the only company in the state to have it, but 2 other title companies were kind of pissed off that we had an active military discount and a senior citizens discount because they were complaining much. Basically, the state's like, look, you did do all the paperwork, but they're getting so upset that they wanted us to then go pay like 150 grand and do all this paperwork to get it approved for everyone, which would then not give us the advantage of having that discount. Everyone would have access to it. So we're like, well, why are we going to pay money for every title company to have the same discount? So unfortunately, the active military and the senior citizen discount does not apply as of like a month or 2 ago. But the discount that is still there that I want you to be aware of is this one. It's called concurrent close. What that means is if you're on the listing side or the buying side, either way, if you can get both sides to close with Real Advantage Title, we will give the buyer's side a 30% off discount on their policy, which can be a substantial amount of money. And sometimes when you're trying to get the deal closed and you say, hey, to the seller, look, or let's say you're on the buyer's or the seller's side and you really need to sell and it sways them, you can contact the buyer's agent and say, hey, look, if you close with our title company instead of yours, we can save your client 30% and we can get it closed in the next week rather than stringing this out to find a seller or a buyer. So just know that if you get both sides, the buyer's side will save 30% on their policy. Other things to know here, this is crucial. Policies are regulated by the state. Every title company is responsible for submitting their numbers to the state and getting them approved. Okay, so once those are in, the policy rates are not something that can fluctuate, but with an escrow officer, their fees, little things can be adjusted to kind of help out on the deal. But, and this is where I say but, you guys as real estate agents, I'm sure that you'll have family members or friends that you'll do deals for, and you might give them a percentage off your commission. At the end of the day, you don't want to work for free, right? So even if you give a discount, eventually you're like, look, I can do this, but if I go any lower, I can't pay bills. So even though escrow officers have a little bit of leniency in what they do, at the end of the day, no one wants to work for free. So just be conscious of that there are some adjustments that can be made, but that's why there's a little fluctuation. Now, one of the last things, and it's really important to understand about Real Advantage, we're not the only company that owns our own underwriter. There are a few other companies that do, but where it is a unique situation, our underwriter company only services Real Advantage. Now, you're probably wondering, what does that mean? We can shop around to other title companies for their underwriters. They might have a better policy rate. Maybe. Typically, we do come in lower than the other companies, which is very nice. But if we have to, we can shop around to see if we can get an underwriter to do a better policy. However, with us owning our own company, it makes it very nice for, us or the escrow team to call the head guy. There's no red tape and say, hey, we're trying to get this deal done. It's a tricky situation, whether it's an easement or how they're funding it, whatever the case may be. And he can literally walk down the hall to the underwriter and say, what is the risk involved? Can we take this on? How can we make this work? And then he can come back in a short period of time to say, look, you want to do this, here's the stipulation, we'll take on the risk and get it done because it's a tricky situation. This is what it'll cost, or this is why we can or cannot do it. And that's unique in how fast we can do that. We're the only one in the state that has that ability. So if someone's like, well, they're not the only ones to own their own underwriter, that's true, but the advantages of what we can do. And just to give you a last example, and then we'll open it up for a few questions. Does everyone here know what Bitcoin is? Right? Cryptocurrency. This happened, I think last year. There was a gentleman who came to us and he wanted to buy a second home in Park City with Bitcoin. And I'm thinking, first of all, how much Bitcoin do you have to afford an entire house, right? That's substantial. Well, Russ Smith, who is the president over Utah, our parent company is based out of California. They're backed by the Lloyd's of London, which are the deepest pockets on the planet. Like we can weather any financial storm. That's the easy part. But because our underwriters are owned in-house and only service us, this gentleman went to Russ, and Russ called up the president and said, hey, we have a guy here wants to buy a $15 million house with Bitcoin, or whatever the price was. It was insane. It took about a month or so. We went to the legislature here in the state and said, how can we make this work? Our underwriter is willing to insure it. And it went through. So as of now, we're the only company to make a transaction like that happen in the state of Utah. And that's because we own our own underwriters and have the ability to make that decision. So I'm still learning how that all works, but just to give you an idea of why we can do what we can do, that's part of it. But we do have the ability to shop from other underwriters if the policy amount or something needs to be looked at or get a second opinion. I would do the same just to know what I'm shopping for, right? Car rates on car insurance. I don't just go with Progressive or Geico because it's the commercial I see all the time. I'll look into them, but 15 minutes or less doesn't always save me 15% on my car insurance because I didn't take the time to look around at other places to know and educate myself. So I just want to be open with you guys that you understand where you're at. Now that we've gone over some of the basics, does anyone have a question or something that was brought up where you need a little clarity? Anyone have a transaction or a deal going on right now where you're not sure what to do? Not quite yet.
No, we're all pretty new.
Okay, so tell me, when did you guys start with KW? Did you just barely come on board or?
I came on board in October.
Okay, awesome. Sarah?
End of October. Yeah, end of October, like Halloween.
Nice. And Shelly, what about you?
Beginning of November.
Okay, so everyone's kind of in the same boat. It's been about a month and a half, right? You're still drinking from the fire hose, trying to feel out what is being an agent mean. Phoenix is an extremely good contact, and so is Coach Dave, to understand what you should be doing right now until you have, a client. Whether you have a listing or you go under contract with a buyer, what do you do in your downtime while you're building your SOI, while you're prospecting? One thing, and you're more than welcome to reach out and we can set up a time. Something that we as a company have available to you is a farming tool that has other tools inside to help you with prospecting. So if you're needing help finding people, I'm more than happy to sit down with you. We'll get you set up. It's an in-house closed network, so it's not like you're getting spam from some software. And it helps you create farms and look for places to start door knocking, sending mailers, get more property information. I think one of the most daunting things for an agent from my perspective is the question, where do I start? How do I find people? Like what do I do when you'll work on scripts with Coach Dave, you'll work on other marketing things. The Keller Williams book has the 8x8 principle. There's a lot of really good resources at your fingertips, but a lot of times you may have all the tools, but you don't even know where to start. So if you need help on that side, I'm more than happy to sit down with you, get you registered on there, show you how it works. It's one tool out of many that can help you, but it's nice because it can help you organize maybe where in the city or where in the state you want to focus your attention and kind of create a plan of attack rather than just saying, you know what, maybe the avenues, I'll just go knock doors and see what happens. It could work, but I'm happy to help. So know that resource and asset is available to you. At the same time, my bit of advice for you right now, take as many classes, take the time right now until you have clients to educate yourself as much as you can. That way, while you're in downtime and you don't have clients or you still haven't found them, you feel like you're being productive because you're creating, let's say, Mark, this is rhetorical. And I'm going to say, if I was Mark, what is my marketing strategy? Big question mark. Okay. I need a really good photo of myself and maybe like my own little signature stamp that I could put on a mail card, like a mailing card, like a get to know me. And one thing that I've learned from a few people, and it's a good idea, just get a little postcard like this and have a really catchy image on the front. Something that people like to look at. People do everything from the Statue of Liberty, maybe the arches down in Moab. That way, if you get it in the mail, you may not throw it away because you see the arches and you're like, wow, that's really pretty. What's that? And the front's just a nice image with maybe a little watermark. They don't see it as advertising. They're like, oh, someone sent me a postcard. Some people even put it up on their refrigerator because it's a nice image. Not a bad way to not spend a whole lot, and you're not trying to be creative and someone's like, it's an ad, I'll chuck it. They see that nice photo and they're like, maybe I'll keep it. They flip it over, just introduce like, hey, I'm Mark. I'm actually your neighbor. I live, down the street, whatever it is, and just say, I'm in your neighborhood. I'm an expert in the real estate market. And right now with interest rates so low, whatever you want to put, that's where Coach Dave can help you with that. But you'll get an idea of, how do I even market myself? What is my brand? What is my personality? Maybe you don't like to door knock. That's fine. I don't blame you. I did it for 2 years and my fingers still bleed from knocking doors in South Korea, right? I hated it. It was awkward, and that was not, I'm a spiritual person, not a religious person. So I was out there to help people. But as soon as someone sees that you're with any kind of business and they see your name, they might shut the door without even listening to you. So if you can find another way to at least contact them to let them know that you're there to help them, maybe you start with that. You develop your marketing that you feel comfortable with, and then just go out and try it and see if anything bites. I mean, honestly, that's the best thing you can do because you need to start getting deals before you can even work with title, right? So I'm not going to force feed it to say, hey, come work with us because you don't have the deal yet. We got to get you going, which is why we created a farming tool to help you. But once you start getting a deal or two, we'd love for you to try us out. That's the whole point. It's a business relationship. We're giving you access to something. You're not being charged for it. At the same time, once you get a couple deals, try us out. If you like working with us, that's how you decide, yeah, this is the title company I trust, I go with, we get it done, and I don't have to worry. So I can spend my time finding people. Does that help? Okay, I'm really transparent. I'm not here to sell you on something. I just want you to feel educated and a little confident to move forward. And once you do that, I believe in what we're doing as a company, which is why I even signed on to work here. If I didn't, I'd be like, I'll go be a real estate agent, make more money. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna screenshot your addresses. Sarah, I see you on here. Shelly, would you like me to send you that information as well on how long the insurance lasts? Because then I can just send it to all three of you once I get the answer.
Yes, I'll put my address in the chat.
Okay, do that. And then I'm going to screenshot it. And when I get the answer, just know that I'll be sending you an email from my work email with that simple thing. And if you guys want to reach out to set up a one-on-one so we can get you hooked up on the farming app and just kind of go over some ideas, please feel free to reach out. My cell number should be up at the top. Yeah, we'll get going. I mean, it's an interesting time. I think you guys are in a very exciting field that can be very rewarding. The hardest part is your schedule and your success highly depends on you creating your own structure and workflow. Everyone's going to give you the tools to build something, but they don't really give you a roadmap. And that can be very challenging. So just know that when you have questions on title or something else is there, I'm here to help you the best I can, and, go to town, make some money, feel successful, feel empowered, and hopefully you have a work-life balance that keeps you sane at the same time. So you're not just working stiffs. No one wants to buy a house from someone who has their eyes closed because they're working too hard. And anyway, you guys will be great. Thank you for your time. If you have questions, reach out. If not, I will email you with the answer probably this afternoon.
Thank you.
Spencer.
You're very welcome. Have a great day, guys. Good luck.
Bye.
See ya.